Hey everyone, John Henry here, slingshotfutures.com, and welcome to the daily futures and crypto market outlook for tomorrow's trading, tomorrow being the 19th of the month. Overall, we're still seeing some pretty slow markets, but the Dow is certainly doing pretty well, up 140 points at the moment. Everything else, though, relatively calm and stable and just kind of making its way around, and we gotta play it a little bit safer while we're looking at these kinds of markets. But before we jump on in, always like normal, make sure to swing it over to slingshotfutures.com, scroll down and click on the Join the Daily Outlook newsletter. From there, you'll be able to sign up on our email list so you'll be notified every time one of these videos comes out. Along with that, in the newsletter itself, we talk about all kinds of different stuff, from stocks, cryptos, futures, you name it. It'll show up in there at some point if it moves, and it's a great newsletter to get your hands on if you haven't done so already. Along with that, make sure to sign up for a 3-day trial, a free 3-day trial in the live trade room, so you can sit down with us for a couple days and see what we're doing all morning while we trade these markets of ours. It's a way that you can kind of hang out in the live trade room, hang out with some of the other members, see my screens, see the trades that we're looking at taking, see basically how everything works. So if you haven't done so already, it's a great way to kind of get an inside look in terms of how everything is working and going on. So make sure to sign up for that if you haven't done so already. Now, looking at the overall movement that we have for today, the euro is catching a little bit of a lift. We had that drive lower, they retested major support at 17,730, and now we're catching some buy movement back up. We're stuck in a little bit of an area of interest, though. Now, I only have this little green square going for so much, a little bit of the amount of time that you could really space it out, but if you wanted to, you can easily see if you extend this to the left, there's a lot of back and forth around this area. We've got lows, highs, and lows. You get the idea, and now we're kind of hovering around that same location again. So really what I'm looking for in this zone is sellers to want to come in initially. We have the buyers that are trying to break out above the highs, but every time the buyers have tried to break out above that, if they don't immediately take it, they typically fail back lower. That's what we had back here, back here, back here. It's really, etc. That's kind of what we're seeing in this location. We are back. The buyers are trying to break above it, but they're not doing very good. So if we start to see some signs of failure, this could easily roll over and drive back down. Now, I'm not necessarily looking for a big new low. It might want to drive further down and get some big new low, but in all honesty, this looks like they're trying to form a bottom of a potential range. So if they are going to put in a range here, this seems to be about the best fit for that range. And really what I'm looking for is the next candle, maybe the next one after that, to start turning bearish for selling pressure on the way down. But if that fails to show up, or you get a bear candle that looks something like this, that's not enough conviction for the sellers, and we're likely going to see a steeper move higher back up towards the earlier area of support and resistance at around 88.75 or so. So at the moment, we're in a little bit of a tipping point. Either the sellers are going to take over in this area for a big push back down to the lows, or the buyers are going to sustain the sellers' attempt, cause them to fail, and push the market back up again. Over on gold, we have a nice descending wedge working its way lower. We haven't completed that full reversal down. A full reversal in the sense of measuring the high of that news move to the low where the news move started, and then basically drawing that further down, right? Drawing that initial range, copying and pasting that on the way down, and we have what we call a deviation lower. We've missed that deviation lower by just a little bit. They have a little bit more room to go, and arguably we only have 2 good pushes on this wedge, so we could have easily another one in line. But the one big thing that stands in the way of the sellers is simply the fact that we are finally now pulling back to considerable cheap, quote-unquote, air quotes if you couldn't see them, cheap prices. Now, cheap prices in the case of gold, really the reason that we say that is because we have a big spike up, and that leads into a spike in channel, spike in wedge type scenario. Generally, when those types of scenarios break down, they want to come back to where that channeling point started and then start looking for reversals back up. We are balanced right on top of that right now. So if we do start seeing the buyers show up with a decent amount of conviction, this could end up being the bottom of the move, and we could be looking for quite the rally back to the upside. But for right now, gold sellers still own the market. It's hard to want to get in the way of those sellers, but if we start seeing the buyers tip the scales a little bit, it wouldn't be a surprise to start seeing longer term buyers jumping in on gold so that they can hold on for probably the next couple weeks at this rate, so we can get back up towards those highs. On crude oil is we're just cycling. We're stuck inside the range. Range high seems to fit best at around 52.27. Range lows have been fitting well at 51.22, and we're just ping-ponging back and forth inside of there. Those are the same areas that we had major support and resistance from earlier, so it isn't a surprise to see those areas act up again. And if we go even further back, you can see the highs coming into play there. We're sort of creating a multi-tiered range. If we zoom in a little bit, fairly easy to see that as well, where we can see they are attempting to put in a little bit of a low, slightly higher up, but I think the overall range still holds fine. It's just a matter of kind of a middle ground. If sellers are selling at the highs, maybe they're taking partial profit off here and then looking for full profit, and vice versa for the buyers, and that's causing a little bit of a middle zone inside of here where the market is finding some balance. At the moment, we do have an overall bullish uptrend. We have an ascending wedge, and we are at the highs of the range. So the only thing that doesn't go with the buy side is the fact that we're at the highs of the range. I would like to see this dip a little bit lower down to the channel lows, or even better, down to the range lows once again, and then look for some buying pressure to push the market back up from there towards new highs. Now, if we do start breaking out towards new highs, the one next big level that we're going to have to worry about is up at 52.75. The last time that we were there, the sellers hammered price down. So if we can come back to those highs, it'll be very interesting to see what they want to do up here in terms of sellers defending it, or are buyers strong enough to break through it. The long-term buyers are still in, and they're still looking for that objective to the upside, but I have to assume that a lot of those long-term buyers that we've been talking about since really the beginning of October have probably taken some profit off the table already. And then finally, over on the S&P continues to wedge itself out. We're grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding. If you notice, the Dow is up 142 points. We talked about that earlier as well. Above 23,000, now at 23,103. We have some very good bullish momentum still sticking around the index markets. The NASDAQ has finally caught up. They are at the highs as well. But for the most part, you know, the index markets are just pinned. They're not really pulling back very far, because every time they do, buyers feel like they're going to miss the move and they jump in, and that causes the market to shove back up to a new high again. So we're in a situation where we're getting really, really shallow pullbacks in a very strong trend that just keeps on pushing up and up and up and up. So overall, we have to sit on the buy side. It's not really giving us much of a choice. Of course, I would love to see some cheaper prices. I would rather not buy at the high hoping it goes higher. That has worked for the past month or so. But at the same time, I would much rather buy low, so we have a lot more room for that profit to take place and plenty of time to do it, rather than buy high and then quickly exit after, you know, a couple hours of trading. So looking for buying low, at the very least, previous swing highs, major swing lows, coming in around 56 3/4 up to 57. And if we can get a deeper pull down, you know, it wouldn't be a bad thing to see it at around 50/4. I wouldn't mind seeing some of those cheaper prices as well. So that's going to do it at the outlook for the futures side of things. Now, when it comes to news, we don't have a ton of news going on, but we do have a few things to keep our eyes open. So when it comes to news, tomorrow we have at 4:30 out of the UK, the retail sales month-over-month for September, forecasted at negative 0.1%. And then at 8:30 tomorrow morning in the US session, we have the Philly Fed Manufacturing Index for October, forecasted at 22. The previous was 23.8. That's really all the news that we have going on for tomorrow, though, so not a ton to really worry about on the news calendar, but there are a couple things we do need to keep our eyes on. Jumping over to the cryptocurrency side of things, starting off on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is catching a beautiful pullback. Finally, right? We've been pinned to the highs. We broke above 5,000 and almost ran straight to 6,000. Things just threw on the rocket thrusters and didn't turn them off again. We're finally getting what I would consider a healthy pullback. And what's looking really nice right here is the fact that we are forming a nice potential high. We can copy that, transpose it down to the lows. We have an exhaustive breakout at the bottom. That exhaustive breakout did lead into larger trend support. If we zoom out, we can see that trend line working its way up. And that also creates a crossing point where we have both the flag low and the channel bottom all coming into play. We have a beautiful reaction. What I would love to see is a correction back into that hot spot and then shove the market right back up and finish that job off to 6,000. Everything is looking really, really good to the upside on Bitcoin. Bitcoin still remains to be an absolute beast. Hopefully you've been jumping in along with us when we were talking about it back at 3,000, because man alive, 6,000 doesn't seem too far away, and that's only a month ago that we were talking about that, not even. So still, Bitcoin looking like an absolute monster, ripping to the upside, getting a little bit exhaustive on this pullback. I would consider this a healthy pullback so that we can look for continuation to the upside for a little more bullishness. Of course, Ethereum on the table. We're going to skip Bitcoin Cash. You know my stance on that. I'm not a big fan of it right now, just due to the fact that we have a fork coming around the corner, and well, I would rather let the market figure out what they want to do from there. Ethereum, noting the fork, Ethereum did have their fork come out. It didn't go off completely perfectly, as most forks, but it did go off pretty much without a hitch. It was a very smooth fork that went through. I believe they called it the Byzantium fork. We've got one more a little bit later that should be coming out, I believe, in November. But for right now, everything seems to be kind of stable again. We caught a heavy pullback, but we are pushing into major support from around 291 down to 285 or so. If we can get a slightly larger dip lower, 278.35 is just below that for more support. Everything is looking really, really strong. Once again, I would consider this a healthy pullback. Remember, Ethereum only 4 or 5 months ago was sitting at around $10. So the fact that we're at 300, 400, that's a really big move in a very short period of time. So we need some pullback. The market needs to fill in some of that gapping that they made on the way up. And I view this as a perfectly healthy thing to see. So buying at the lows and selling off at the highs makes a lot of sense right now in Ethereum. And we are near the lows. We can get one more push down. Litecoin, of course, another market that had just a monstrous rally to the upside all the way up to almost 100 before pulling back. Finding some balance between 50s and 60s, sometimes a little bit higher towards 70. But for the most part, we are finding a decent balance in here. We heavily broke out of the high side and are pulling back. Now, one notable area here, of course, is the location that the market got stuck in for quite a while, right inside here. Now, we have a little ways to go until we hit that. That's at 51. And we have the 78.6% retracement at 52.76. Not to mention that this whole zone is kind of you could mark it up as a longer-term buy zone of the market, treating it as resistance for a while, breaking above it, coming back to it as support would make a lot of sense. Litecoin overall still looks very strong, and I see Litecoin sitting at around 150 to 200 going into next year, mid next year, late next year. Makes a lot of sense to see more lift, and I still think Litecoin is pretty cheap in terms of the overall grand scheme of things. But where we stand right now, we are catching a really nice bullish lift. I would like to see one more bounce, something like this. Get a zigzag back to the upside so we can buy into that dip one more time and then shove the market back to the highs, and then we can see if we can finish off that big $70 mark shortly after. Then there's NIO, good old NIO, one of my favorites. NIO for a long time has just been kind of stuck here. We were talking about NIO back when it was around 22 or so. Caught a beautiful lift all the way up to almost 40 before starting to pull back. We put in a little bit of a head and shoulders pattern. We are starting to catch a little bit of sell side action, but that sell side action was quickly stopped by major support at 26.21. Now, the head and shoulders, if we don't break up, if we don't break above this invalidating the head and shoulders, we do have a potential dip down to around 1860s, 1850s, in that area as a major target to the downside for sellers to drive the market lower. And that is also the area where a lot of buyers will start buying in, assuming that it's not going to get much cheaper than that, and look for a reversal back to the highs. In all honesty, I think anything under 27 is going to be cheap. Anything under 30 is going to be cheap, really. But for the most part, we are getting a nice breakout to the upside out of some of this chop and slop, getting a healthy pullback down to the 61.8. Also testing just kind of this middle band here. I would still love to see a retest of these lows at around 26.70 or lower, but if we don't get that, we do have some reason for buyers to be buying in, at least in the middle section here, for continuation up. Ethereum is one of those blockchain techs that I see going, we're talking a year or so again, but this is one that it wouldn't surprise me to see it up in the hundreds, going on 200s, maybe even further into next year. It's something that looks like it has a lot of upside potential, depending on what China does. And then, of course, there is also ETP. Now, ETP is another variation. It's another type of NIO or Ethereum, and ETP is one that has a very good long-term capability as well. They have a much more stringent requirement, a much more stringent financial cost when launching ICOs on ETP, which is also, I'm not exactly sure where ETP came from, but the actual coin coin, or the company itself, is called Metaverse ETP. So the coin itself, ETP, looks like it has a very strong future ahead of it. I think it is very cheap at $4.60 right now. I was buying into the dip at around $4 and lower. And this is another one of those coins where it could easily spark and take off like crazy. And it wouldn't be a surprise to see this catch up to NEO. In my opinion, I think ETP is what NEO should have been. Not that NEO is bad, I think NEO has a good future as well, but I think ETP does what NEO does better. And for that reason, I could see ETP next year going into the 300s or 400s, right around where Ethereum is, if they start really taking off. And that means that buying at $4, well, you might just be able to ride that train off to the highs all the way up. We'll have to wait and see, of course, but ETP, I think, has a very bright future, and it is one that I am definitely looking at and buying into. So that's going to do it for the outlook. As always, doesn't matter what market you're approaching or what you're trading, make a plan, trade that plan, follow the rules, and you'll be A-okay. Until next time, we'll see y'all.